So I want to talk today about how to avoid spousal support. Are there strategies you can use? Are there ways to avoid paying spousal support or alimony in a divorce case? So, nobody wants to pay alimony. Nobody wants to have to do that. It's not good. It's a commitment. It's financial. It's all those things. Alimony, spousal support, same thing. First of all, those are synonyms. The statute in Michigan refers to it as spousal support. So you heard people referring to that. It's a mouthful. Alimony means the same thing. So alimony, how do you avoid it? Are there strategies to avoid it? There definitely are. There are things that you can do to avoid paying alimony. Spousal support, avoid paying too much, avoid paying it for too long. Certainly a lot of things that you could look at to do. So first of all, alimony is based on these 12 different factors under Michigan law. They look at how long you're married, let's just use male perspective. This is the husband. The husband's the higher earner of the two people in the marriage. Let's just say that that's the deal. It's not always the deal, of course, but let's just say. So they look at how long you've been married. They look at your wife's age, her health, her ability to work, what she's currently making if she's working. So you're looking at these different factors. You're looking at your ability to pay it. They're looking at her need for it. They're looking at prior standard of living. Is it the lifestyle that you have? What does it cost to keep that lifestyle going? What are your monthly expenses to keep the house and whatever else you have going? They're looking at fault. They're looking at is somebody the cause of this divorce case? That's a factor. It's not going to be like a huge life-changing thing or something, but it definitely is a factor. They're looking at, and then, just general principles of equity, of fairness. So, first of all, it's not just run some software and get a number, and I'm talking to you people in Washtenaw County in particular. Keep in mind, you don't just run software. There's nothing that says that under Michigan law. Those software programs, if you print out software, so you run software, run some spousal support guidelines, and print that out, you can't even, that's not even admissible in evidence. So forget the program, but it's a guideline, it's a rule of thumb. It's kind of like calculating child support for adults, not to sound insulting, but that's really what it is. So when you're looking at spousal support, alimony, the first thing you're looking at is, do you have children? Because if you have minor children, child support's required to be calculated first. So before you even get any alimony going, you're looking at child support. And that's one strategy, is one way to avoid spousal support is you're paying some child support, and that's it. There's not money left over to pay spousal support or alimony. So that's one way that this all works. And then another strategy with avoiding spousal support alimony would be you do a buyout. Reach some sort of agreement through settlement negotiations. Just say, I don't want to be paying alimony. This doesn't make any sense. We don't have kids. We're going to break our ties and go our separate ways. I'm not paying any of her bills anymore. She's not paying any of mine. But if it looks like, based on guidelines, based on just looking at every factor here, that you're going to be paying some alimony or spousal support, one strategy, if you don't want to pay it, is do a buyout. Figure out, okay, I'll give you extra money on the assets. You can have more than your share coming that you would have coming on things, and let's do that. Another thing would be to look at fault. Is this a situation where your wife is the cause for the divorce? She's the one that's cheating. She's the one that's doing. If that's the situation, if that's the deal, it wouldn't make sense to just say, well, then she just gets an alimony check every month and everything's good. You can use that to your advantage. You can say, well, I'm not paying this amount of alimony because I feel like fault should be some consideration, and Michigan law will back you up on that. Now, it's not going to be a game changer. You're not going to go from paying alimony to not paying it at all just because you can establish that there's some fault. And part of the reason for that, you got to keep in mind, that these cases are settled out of court. 98% of divorce cases are settled. So you're not going to really be at a trial and saying everything you can think of that's bad about her, and she's saying all these things about you, and then a judge is supposed to make decisions. That's not really how all this is going to go, and that's not how it works. So a lot of these ideas with strategies about avoiding alimony or spousal support is, it's got to be a strategy that's going to be something you both can agree on, because you're basically looking at a settlement is the most likely outcome in your divorce. So if you think, well, there's no way my wife's never going to agree to not be paid alimony, then you got to do something like a buyout. You can say, well, I'll pay this money instead. And buyouts are easier to do than they used to be. Now that our alimony laws are such that it's not tax deductible, you don't have a tax consideration with a buyout that we used to have. It used to be alimony was tax deductible. The only way you could deduct it basically was if you paid it monthly, so there was no buying it out, paying a lump sum, prepaying. You had to just make your monthly payments, which people don't like to do. But it was the only way, short answer, to qualify under the IRS for those payments to be tax deductible. Now they're not tax deductible. Now they are child support payments for adults, because child support is also not tax deductible. So now you're just making monthly payments. So you could say, well, if I'm supposed to pay this money over a term of years, you add up the payments. If I'm supposed to pay $500 a month for 5 years, $500 a month is $6,000 in a year. 6,000 times 5 is 30,000. You could say, well, 30,000 is a total. Now, of course, that's not taking into account the time value of money, meaning, a lump sum today is worth more than payments over time for a lot of different reasons, including interest rates and risk and all these things. But a rough idea would be, okay, well, that's the number. So then I can say, well, I'll give you more of the retirement account or more of the equity in the house or something like that and buy out your interest in this alimony. So that's a good strategy. It's one way to be looking at things. A prenup is another consideration if it's not too late. If you're not even married yet, one way people avoid alimony or spousal support is they put right in their prenuptial agreement that they're not going to pay spousal support, or they're only going to pay it if this and this and this happen. And those are valid. Prenuptial agreements are valid in the state of Michigan. They're enforceable as long as the requirements are met at the time that they're entered. So that's another strategy. Usually it's too late. Somebody that's considering divorce is already, of course, married. But that's one way that you'll see people avoiding spousal support or alimony is they do a prenuptial agreement. Can you do a postnuptial agreement? I mean, you can. Those get tricky. They can be, it can be a lot sometimes trying to comply with what's required for those to be enforceable. You need something called consideration, the term of art, as we like to say as lawyers. The word consideration has a special meaning under law, and consideration would be a bargain for exchange. So I can't just do a postnuptial agreement for no reason and then expect I'm going to hold my wife to it. It would have to be based on something that was taken into consideration when you agreed to it, meaning you had filed for divorce, you were planning on going for a divorce, and now you're going to work it out and stay together, and you do a postnuptial agreement. That's one way that you could do that as long as you meet the other requirements for a postnup. So, one strategy on avoiding alimony spousal support for the future would be to do a postnuptial agreement if the circumstances allow it. It's certainly possible. Another one would be to end an unhappy marriage when you need to. One of the factors when they're looking at spousal support or alimony is how old is this person? In this case, your wife. How old is she? The older she is, the more likely there's going to be alimony. Somebody in their 20s, probably not getting any alimony. First of all, you couldn't have been married that long if you're only in your 20s. And another factor on alimony is how long you were married. So another strategy is get out of an unhappy marriage when you can. Don't put it off. Don't wait. Nobody's happy in the unhappy marriage. Waiting on until the kids are whatever age or whatever thing. There's no good answer. There's never a good time to do it. If you're not happy, if it's not going to work, then you need to just face that, and that'll help you. Another strategy on alimony, spousal support is get advice from a lawyer. I mean, we know a lot about this stuff. We can tell you in a short meeting whether we think you're in a situation where you're at risk for having to pay some alimony or spousal support, and then we can start figuring out strategies. Let's look at what's the marital estate, how much money do you have, how much are each of you going to walk away with in your divorce case, because that's another strategy. If your wife is walking away with enough money to support herself and work on things, that's important. That's a good factor. It doesn't mean you're going to pay no alimony, but it certainly affects things, and you can use that. You can leverage it. Maybe you give her some more than her share of the property settlement, and that could be a way to deal with it. So there are definitely some different things you could do here. Most of them are going to need to focus on negotiation. I mean, you're going to work this out, so it has to be a settlement. So it's not like there's some trick and then you're not paying alimony. But you can certainly work out a way where you're paying less than you should have been paying, or do a buyout on it, or use some of these other things. If you haven't married yet, you could do a prenuptial agreement, or if the situation is right, do a postnuptial agreement. Those are some considerations, and don't ignore what the law says. Don't let somebody do not let someone tell you that fault is not a factor when it comes to alimony or spousal support, because it's right in the statute. It's definitely a factor. It's in there. So it's something that has to be considered. Now, the problem with settlement negotiations is it can be difficult to get your spouse, your wife in this case, to agree that she was at fault for the breakdown of the marriage, because people just don't like to agree to that stuff. They always feel like the other person's at fault. So that's where fault gets a little tricky to use, but it's definitely something that's alive and well. And, you know, keep in mind there are different types of spousal support too, types of alimony. There's, you know, you can pay modifiable spousal support or modifiable alimony, and you can pay non-modifiable, and those are both valid. And then when you're talking about something that's not modifiable, you can make the duration, you know, how long you're paying it, you can make that not modifiable, and you can make the monthly payment, the monthly amount, not modifiable. So if I'm in a situation where I've been married a long time and I got to pay some alimony, some spousal support, I could agree to, you know, I don't want to pay this the rest of my life, so let's agree to a term of years, let's agree to a duration. So we agree to 7 years of alimony. We can make the 7 years not modifiable, meaning I'm going to pay alimony, spousal support for 7 years no matter what. At the end of the 7 years, that's it, it's done. You can write up an agreement that will be enforceable. At the end of the 7 years, it will be done. It doesn't matter what's happened with either one of your lives, either one of your incomes, or whatever it is. So you can make the duration not modifiable and then make the monthly payment modifiable. So I could say, well, I'm going to pay $500 a month in alimony for 7 years, but the $500 is subject to review, meaning if my income goes up or down during those 7 years, I could pay more, or I could pay less, or if my wife's income changes during those 7 years, same thing. I could be paying more or I could be paying less. Or you could make both the duration and the monthly number modifiable, or you could make both the duration and the monthly number not modifiable. So we could say I'm going to pay $500 a month for 7 years no matter what. It's kind of like a lump sum that you add up those payments, that's the number I'm paying. I'm going to pay it over time, which takes away some of the risk, because that way if something happens, you know, the payments would, beyond my death, they wouldn't continue, for example. So, but if I was going to pay $500 a month for 7 years on alimony, I could agree to make that not modifiable. I could say I'm going to pay that no matter what. Gives both of you some guarantees and able to plan your future a little better. You know that you have the money to do it. Maybe you got the money already set aside and you're just making monthly payments. And then your ex-wife would know she's going to get that money no matter what. She's going to receive that money and go forward that way. So non-modifiable can be tricky. You want to get the right advice about it, because you will be stuck with what you agree to. If you agree that it's not modifiable and all the criteria have been met and you write that up the right way, you will then be stuck with it. That's the whole point. It gets hard to argue that something's modifiable when it says it's not, although there's ways to do that, of course, sometimes depending on the circumstances. But in general, you should assume if you're agreeing to something that's not going to be modifiable, you should assume that that means you're not going to be able to change it later. I mean, of course, that's the whole idea. But I think that's some strategies here. You know, you want to be looking at this the right way. You're not automatically going to have to pay alimony or spousal support. You're not automatically going to have to pay whatever the software says. That's not the deal. That is not Michigan law. That is not how it works. Those programs are not admissible in evidence. So it's important to keep that in mind. They're a rule of thumb. They're a guide. But they're not child support guidelines for adults. You know, child support, you run the guidelines, that's it. That's the number. That's kind of mandatory for the most part. Alimony, not the same deal. Not at all. So don't want anybody trying to tell you different on that. So hopefully that helps. You know, some thoughts about strategies on spousal support, avoiding it, managing it is probably a good word for it.